Okay, so here we go. So for those of you who have been to any of our quarterly events, you'll be more familiar with this format where we get some lovely people and they all think they're here to tell you nice stuff and I'm just here to grill them. Our subject today goes straight to quite a lot of buzz in leadership at the moment. Some of you, let's just have a quick show of hands. How many of you hold a C title? Oh, do you know what happened there? People went, yeah, ooh, do I say, maybe, am I admitting this? You know, there was a bit of shyness around that. For those who had it, how many have got CTO as their title? Hands down, how many have got CIO? Hands down, how many have got C something else? Oh, look at that. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about today, the collapsing C-suite technology roles. It's come to our attention from some of the sessions that we've done before and talking to our community. It's getting a bit complicated out there. I myself have fueled the fire of, do you want to be a CIO or a CTO? Went a bit viral with that one on TikTok, got me into trouble, but there you go. We're going to see what our panel thinks about, does it matter what you're called? Is one better than the other? I'm not sure they're going to answer that directly, but we'll see. So we're going to get into it. I'm David Crawford, by now you know me, I'm the guy who keeps hitting my mic. But I'm going to let everybody else on the panel introduce themselves. Mal, take it away.
Hello everyone, my name's Mal and I'm a board advisor. In the past I've been a VP of both product and engineering, I've been a CTO, and in my last role I was a CPTO, so I'm bringing sort of that element to the mix. I have been working in tech for a very long time and I'm looking forward to having this discussion and see what comes up.
Brilliant. Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen. I am now a NED for a building society, coming from big transformation and operational background, always been in tech.
Hi, Arthur.
Hi everyone, my name's Arthur. I am the CTO at Shawbrook Bank. We are a mid-tier specialist lender for the UK small and medium-sized business. My career mostly started and most of it has been within product, and recently took on the CTO role earlier this year.
Lubomira.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Lubomira. I'm a founder of a new venture, but I've worked with multiple different teams during the kind of initial stages and growth stages, and I've always kind of straddled both worlds of product and technology.
Brilliant, thank you, Lubomira. So we have a founder who's in tech and product, we have a CTO, we have a NED, and we have a CPTO, and I'm a NED, CTO, CIO, fractional something or other.
You win then.
Yeah, no, it's not about winning, it's just about, don't we all do the same thing? We probably all do something of the same thing. So I'm not sure the titles matter, but let's get into that. We are seeing in the boardroom that the technology role, the C-suite role, is being collapsed, particularly, and I think, Mal, this is true for you recently, that the product and the technology role are being collapsed, and the rise of the CPTO is very prevalent at the minute. What are the benefits and drawbacks of combining these C-suite roles?
So I think that it's not just product. What I'm also seeing is the CIO role is merging more into CTO. So concerns around information security as well as IT infrastructure, product, technology, it's all kind of merging into one area, that, at least from a board perspective. What I would say is that the benefits are, firstly, that you have less boundaries, obviously, if there's one kind of person who's looking after all those areas. Secondly, you have less conflict, because you can't disagree and commit with yourself. When you have a team of people who are, like, I've been in businesses with CPO, CDO, they have differences of opinion. And then the third one is allocation. So a lot of the problems and discussions that happen at board level in tech businesses are really about allocation. So where do you put the resources? Do you put them on value creation or on, sort of cost saving, efficiency? And those sort of debates are a lot easier to have if you have one person running it. So that's some of the positives.
So that boiled down, in my mind, to you can kind of keep a tight rein on everything and make best use because you've got one centre of decision making, budget management, all that kind of stuff. I think that's all great. Arthur, does that scale? Because Mal's great, but can he do all of that? Is he superhuman?
So My experience is that I suppose with every company, it's always the who's around the table in the executive suite and the stage of growth in the company. It's always an optimization problem. So what is the organization trying to optimize for? What stage of growth it's at will require different people around that table. And so I think I agree with Mal. I suppose, there's less people to debate and argue, but you also don't get those different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And so that's the downside of actually being super optimized, and you have fewer people around the table, but you also don't get those different points of views as well. And also within one person holding all of those different roles, you always, what you say sort of around the table, what view you sort of promote is always going to be, there's only going to be one voice. And so you're always going to have to put something in the back seat in order to promote something else.
Okay. So you're still sort of saying there needs to be, that one voice, but I'm guessing that you need to be surrounded by some other voices as well. Lubomira, isn't this just going to create lots of fighting?
It can. I think it's interesting, right? Like for me, what I really like is this trend of actually thinking, what does the organization need, rather than just going with, well, to run a team, I need all these roles, and that's it, that's the mantra, right? I need an engineering manager, and I need a product manager, and I need a test, and I need this, and I need that, rather than actually really thinking, what does my company and it's at this stage really need. And kind of just to answer your question, I think when you're not thinking about what does your company need right now, and who are the people that I already have, and what are their strengths, and you're just staffing roles because you think I must have a CTO, a CPO, a CIO, etc., on every level, then you can kind of create a lot of situations in which people are stepping on each other's toes because of their aspirations or experiences or personalities, right? So I've seen situations in which, and I'm sure like maybe everybody kind of can think of a situation where they've seen fighting in the C-suite, right? And it's either for turf or ideas or promotions or etc. But I think what I'm really excited about is the fact that people are actually thinking, okay, you know what? I can just really go for what makes sense for my company, and if it is combination or splitting, then I have a license to do that, rather than just kind of always having to go for all these roles at every level.
So I'm hearing that the context of the size of the company matters, the context of where they are in their maturity, and basically what they need, which sounds great. Karen, as a Ned, and you've had an executive career as well, so you've seen all this. You've probably been involved in a couple of scraps for titles and responsibility, right? Does the Ned view different from this? Are you over all the titles? Where do you stand on that?
I'm a little bit over the titles, but I get why it's very important. I think the titles are relevant. I think it's about the skill set. And from a board perspective, it is a very different window in, as you all know, of what you're looking for. And at the moment, we are recruiting for a CTTRO.
Oh my God, what's that?
Chief Technology and Transformation Officer.
Oh, you win.
But that's a unicorn. They want everyone is like, we need commerciality, and that's the word that not a lot of people mention when they talk about the tech person, but you need to be commercial. So it's someone who can deal with the BAU, deal with the cyber, deal with the A word, deal with all of this innovation, but also look at how the business is going to make money out of this, and at the same time try and run that on a penny. And then also come to people like me and say, oh, by the way, we need 50 million of investment, please. And you get, so all of that. So I think it's interesting as these roles evolve. From a board perspective, they want everything, and we don't really care what it's called, but I think we've got this new title that is just a bit ridiculous.
Mal's getting very excited about it. He could do with another couple of letters in his title. So I think we could spin that now, right?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that's happening is that transformation now is a really major concern almost in every tech company. If your business has been around for more than 5 or 10 years, you will have some transformation to do. And I think Colin mentioned it in the first talk that really every company is becoming a data company. It used to be that every company was becoming a tech company a few years ago, but it's data now that is a predominant concern that I'm seeing. And so you know, whoever it is, the technologist usually gets involved in data strategy, figuring out what to do about transforming data. And that is deeply technical because you have to look at data foundations, how you put that in, how do you articulate that to the board, how do you explain that you have to invest in something that isn't obviously from their perspective necessarily, if they're non-technical, value creation driving. So those kind of conversations, I think, like you were saying, Karen, it's basically you have to be able to articulate this at board level. And if you just speak at a technical level and you don't have the commercial aspect, then it's very difficult to get your point across.
Okay, but I think that brings us on to our next question. And by the way, I haven't got any questions come through yet, so if any of this is resonating, you're disagreeing, agreeing, whatever, do pop a question in the chat and I'll try and work that in. But our next question is about, you're sort of saying, you've got to have a deep data understanding, right? Well, there's some CTOs and CIOs in this room are like, what does he mean? I'm not really into that. I'm more across budgets. I'm more across presentations, as you say, Karen, to the board and thinking about these big strategy things. Because we've all been told as C-suite leaders, strategy is the most important thing. Shouldn't be down in the weeds, right? Now Mal is telling us we've got to be data experts, right? And I think, how do we look at the next generation coming through, and what are we saying to them? Are we saying keep out the boardroom and just tell your strategy CTOs, CIOs what they should be saying? Or should we be opening up the door and saying, don't worry about title, to Karen's point, right? You're not going to find the unicorn anyway. Let's bring all these people in and let their rough edges, be sort of smoothed off through exposure to the C-suite. Lubomira, you've sort of come up and bumped into the C-suite every now and again and then made your way there and didn't like it, so you founded your own company instead, right? but is that something that you experienced? Were you let in the early days into the C-suite, and was it because of your expertise that they didn't have?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I just before I answer that, I think just to highlight one of the big kind of reasons, which Karen, you touched upon, right? Cost saving. Could be a big, because we spoke about pluses and minuses in organizations, but cost saving, because these people are really expensive, right? So I would be quite curious how people think about that in general for this trend. But yeah, I think, look, some of the most successful kind of C-suite leaders I've worked with have recognized where their limitations are, have been really aware about what their role is, what is needed from them in a certain situation, towards kind of the rest of their kind of peers, the C-suite, their board, but also their teams, and have recognized and figured out how to fulfill that need. And that means it's not always by them, right? That means I will put this person from my team to own this piece and support me on that, and I'll give them actually the ownership and responsibility and the freedom to act, right? And whatever the kind of the question is. So I think this is really key, and I don't think it means necessarily letting all these people in all at once, because then it becomes chaos. Then you're just kind of, making the problem even worse. But it's selectively kind of bringing people who hold the certain expertise or the best knowledge to kind of help you solve a problem, right? And that is also includes giving them exposure, right? Not necessarily sitting next to you at all the kind of your board meeting or C-suite meetings, but like giving them the exposure when it's necessary. And that can help you actually bring up your team as well, right?
Can I also just add, especially for technology, CTO, CIO, there's no way anyone's going to be an expert in all of these fields. Data, AI, cyber, all of these. And so really it's about, do you know enough about what good looks like and actually have a strong team? Because there will always be areas where you're not expected to be the expert. And so you talked to the point about leadership and strategy and budgets and all of that. And yes, those things are important as well when you get up to the C-suite. And I think your point about cost cutting, and you see sort of this whole thing, especially within tech companies, around sort of the middle management sort of, delayering, right? And I think this is, you can't really sort of delayer the C-suite, so which is why you see the collapse of these roles is the board and the CEO looking at can you get more optimized exco or folks around the table by having less people and actually making quicker decisions and all of that.
And I think that's probably true, but then you've got to have that next layer below you who are getting more close to being experts, right? So if you're sort of the representative almost, whatever your title is at the board level, and that could be, as you say, Lubomira, to cut costs, that could be a factor. You're still going to have some talent beneath you, right? And these techies, Arthur, they're not always comfortable stepping in front of the board, right? That's not always their favorite place to be. So how do we think about that?
So it's probably the most true to say, the techies, in terms of stereotypically, they're not they're not the most extroverted. They're not the most, people that want to just come up to the stage and speak in front of. First of all, you have to be leaning into things that are uncomfortable. First of all, and in order to get up to the C-suite, because the C-suite really is a very different role, whether you're talking about CTO, CPO, CIO, CMO, they're very different than the layers below. And it's not for everyone. And so you really have to think about who are your directs and the folks that are around you where you can support and they want to actually lean into growing into those C-level roles.
Okay, I think that's good. Just want to touch on something here. We've got a question come through from Vicky, and it says, does collapsing the C-suite roles reduce the healthy tension the separate roles create? So we've just talked about people coming into the C-suite and they might find that uncomfortable, but we touched earlier on the arguments, right? I've held the CTO role and the CPTO role. I quite like having a CPO as my opposite number because we get a healthy tension, right? I like a healthy tension. I'm not sure Vicky does, but how do we feel about that? What have you seen there as having held both and separately?
Yeah, so we did. I've been in both situations. The thing that we didn't talk about the drawbacks, or at least I didn't. That definitely, if you have one person who's doing all those things, first of all, you create a SPOF, single point of failure. You have issues around succession. You can have, like who's gonna, if you leave or go under a proverbial bus, who's going to take over that team. You do have to build a first team, which is the points that have been made. It can be very challenging. So I definitely think there are drawbacks, and I think diversity is very important in thinking as well.
Okay.
And if you have one person who's deciding everything, then where's the diversity in that kind of mode of management?
And so that sounds like you're saying actually it is good to have a bit of competitive kind of spirit between
it's a
different
trade-off.
parts of the organisation.
I think what I'm seeing though is that the trade-off is increasingly in certain types of businesses, especially direct-to-consumer businesses,
Okay.
which is what I've worked in a lot. Things are just moving so fast that these are nice to haves, but on balance, it sort of seems to me anyway to be trending more towards combined roles.
So it's interesting, Michael has said, and I think it touches on the point you're making here, it says the conflict between data engineering, security, etc. has to be resolved at one level or another.
That's what I'm
right?
saying. Yeah.
So is the C-suite the best place to resolve those conflicts? Well, if we've collapsed all the roles and you're arguing with yourself in the C-suite, it seems not, right?
Very quick comment on this. There's one thing about being in the C-suite, there's another about being in the board, and one of my pet bugbears is in the UK, it's still very common for CTO, CPTO, CIO, whoever it is, to not be at the board. And if you're not at the board, then it's very difficult to represent those things effectively. I've been in quite a lot of board meetings. It is quite theatrical. That's the nature of those things. It's not like, a tech meeting, and you have to be able to communicate what is going on. And because every business is becoming a data and tech business, if you don't have someone in there, you can have scenarios. I've been in board meetings where people have said, what is an API now? And things of that nature. So it's very, very often the case that there's nobody technical in the board meeting, so it's problematic.
Go for it, guys.
Just sort of really quickly, I suppose sort of your question about where are those arguments or tension being held, and I suppose what kind of company do you want to be, right? And so to Mal's point is, if every company is a tech, data, blah, 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 why shouldn't those conversations be at the exco level, right? Why shouldn't the GC or the CFO or be as well, experienced with, what we talk about in terms of on a day-to-day basis as tech leaders, right? Because that's actually how you get that transformation within the organization, is if everyone understands technology.
But now you've gone in a different direction, Arthur. Now you're saying all the non-techie C-suite people should get their tech on, right? And I think that's okay. If you're a really digitally focused, maybe your product's digital and stuff like that, I think you could have that expectation. But in some of the larger corporates, right? Karen, I wonder if some of the boards you've sat on, you look around and everybody goes, yeah, I'm not techie. Don't ask me, I'm not techie.
And I think that has been in the past, but I always think that the fact that all of us have ever sat on an exco or in a board, you need to know your finance. Mm-hmm. You need to know your numbers. Yet the CFO doesn't go, no, it is only me. Mm-hmm. Okay, we always know the CFO. She's the one that you normally have to bribe with cups of tea when you want some more money. But it's that point of it, and I think actually the whole exec has got that accountability to actually up their tech skills, because we are all and data, and understand this, because it comes back to the commerciality. If you want to drive your business forward, you need to understand this. The digital world is the world that's driving a lot of businesses now, and that application of that. So I think it's really important, and I think everyone has to. So, for example, I can talk about my personal company. They purposefully went out and found an ed from Technologist.
Right.
However, I am working with the rest of the board, and every other board meeting, we have board education sessions. And technology, I'm being asked to feed through. And this is just the board element, so that they all understand the API question.
Yeah.
Right.
They all can tell you, because we've had someone in, did a brilliant explanation about TV cables for the role, but they now all get it. So it's all things like that. So I do think as a board, but also if we go down a level as the exec, everyone has got that accountability, because I imagine everyone in this room at some point has had a session with someone from finance to say, help me, or someone from HR. If you're the person who's expected to make people redundant, you don't go with an HR problem, because if you dare, that's a brave person.
Yeah.
Yet technology, everyone feels it's acceptable to look at the technologist in the room. So I think there is a lot of education that needs to happen at exec to say, come on, you've all got to.
I think that's spot
raise
on.
your game.
I think just say really challenging our people who go, I'm non-technical, and just not letting them get away with that a little bit, right? And by the time you get to the C-suite, you should be able to communicate technology to non-technical people, and they should listen. That's what you're saying, right? They shouldn't just go, they should actually listen and absorb that. And I think that's important. We've got a question here, or a point from John. And John is saying, so far there's been no mention of the CISO role. Is that one that's treated specially, or also being rolled into the CIO, CTO? So I have a view on this. And first of all, CISO is so specialist and complicated, right? I often see it as one of the roles that gets the C title but is never in the board. Right, and it seems now, whenever I've been in the board and held a CTO or a CIO title, I've always had a CISO as a right-hand person, right? Because that's not my area of specialism. But it's really important. So I need to. Is that fair? Should we be having the CISO on the board, or are they too specialist a C-suite role?
I'll take
Go
this.
for it.
So I've performed that role. Well, I've been responsible for it in my last 3 gigs. First of all, they never appoint a CISO because it's got a C in it. And the person reports to the CTO, so it can't be a C. That's one thing that's...
So they're not really called CISOs,
no,
even though they fulfill that role?
They're called head of InfoSec, usually, well, in my experience. And then the other thing I've seen is that usually that role now gets lumbered with IT as well, so it becomes head of IT and InfoSec, and then that person reports to the CTO. That's the pattern I've seen.
Okay, that's a nice trick.
And they have all the same concerns, so all the ISO and CE and all the rest of it. But they kind of, it just gets lumbered with the tech person. So the CTO has that as a responsibility. What I have seen at board is that if you're in a big enough company, risk committee, it becomes very important. Cyber risks and all of the associated work around that tends to get put at the end of the board meeting for like 5 minutes, or
Yeah.
even, or often it just doesn't even get covered. It is a problem. So I mean, I think you made a really important point, Karen, about the tech, understanding of tech at the board level, but security is another huge one. So, everywhere I've worked, they've used Entra ID, and like the security around Entra ID is a huge problem in a lot of legacy businesses, and it never gets covered at board level, even though in theory it should do. But it's one of those areas where I think we need more elevation, and because it gets put, at least in my experience, underneath the CTO. If your CTO isn't at the board level, it's never going to get covered.
So that sounds like what we should be focused on is not necessarily the role or the title, but the representation of C-level things at the board. And who brings them, it depends on who's the most talented or knowledgeable or experienced person to bring them. And that's why I like the idea of, if you can get them after, if they're not too scared to come into the boardroom, I like the idea of bringing your experts into the boardroom on a regular basis.
I'll add to that is, can you explain it in a way that regular humans understand it?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I think for information security, CISOs, that is such a specialist area. And I'm not saying that there aren't CISOs out there that can't do it, but typically you do require a bit of translation, and that's typically why they sit under the CTO or the CIO. So the CISO reports into me at Shawbrook. We don't have another CIO, so all of the operational and infrastructure sits in my area. However, to what you said, Mel, obviously we have board risk committee, we have regular slots and it's actually the CISO that leads that session, and I'm actually accompanying the CISO into that. And so you start to sort of, how do you grow your people to be able to actually speak at a more strategic level to the humans and the board in order to be able to understand these specialist areas is really important.
Okay, I think that's good. So I think we've established that there are lots of reasons why C-suite roles might be collapsed, and there's some pros and some cons to that. We've talked around who else should maybe be in the boardroom, and I guess we've established maybe there are some people who shouldn't be in the boardroom even if they hold a C title, right? But as long as their stuff is fairly represented, right? We touched on product and technology, right? And there's a bit of CIO, CTO in there as well, right? But let's just focus on the product technology, because product for a lot of companies is such an important strategic item, right? It needs to be represented properly. But then technology and how you do that, and whether it's the CIO bit or the CTO, that's at the center of most businesses, right? It's no longer hopefully a cost center for businesses, right? So which do you prioritize? Which is more important? Lubomira, you're a founder. Are you product driven? Are you tech driven? Are you a bit of both? How are you handling that?
Your product is your tech. So it's interesting, right? I guess I just wanted to add something to a discussion we had a minute or two ago. In my experience as a C-suite, it's really to the point, like I think someone asked the question about the tension, right? And it's important to have tension, and at what level do you have this tension? Like I think in my experience, it's really important for the C-suite to come united, right? And to have like one unified message to the rest of the company, whatever that is, because there is one of the most dangerous things you can have is different messages trickling down from different C executives to their respective parts of the organization. And I think that's, one area it's worth actually talking about, right? Because I rather have the kind of tensions being ironed out at the lower level and just having one really strong unified message and image and strategy at the C level, and that goes up to the board and down to the organization, right? Which I think it's a benefit of kind of this collapse, right? Because you don't kind of have the risk of different messages being trickled up and down. And I think like with a lot of the kind of these days, and it really depends on the business, and are you kind of not legacy, but an established business transforming or a startup. Like in a startup world, your technology is your product, right? So I think it really makes sense that the roles are really one and the same, right? If you're an established business with, I worked at Ford. I mean, Ford sells cars, right? Like it's not a technology business, even though they're trying to become one. It's a separate conversation. But it's a really clear example of how the product is very, very different than the technology. Technology is an enabler, right? In various shapes and forms. So the discussion there will be very, very different.
Okay. Karen, it sounds like that's about priorities, right? What is the thing that your business, and it's, depending on its maturity, is focused on? Should those priorities change? All company priorities change as they grow, as they scale, all that kind of stuff. Should we be looking at a more fluid C-suite kind of thing? Sometimes it starts with a tech guy building some product, but then you move over to a product-focused person. Is that something that's possible, or is that going to cause instability at the C-suite?
I sort of think as we get more, I don't quite know when we got obsessed with the term chief. There were so many, I can't remember when that popped up, but now everyone's a chief of something. And that doesn't, and then suddenly everyone was the C-suite, and if you have a chief, you have to be in the C-suite and everything like that. But I think from a technology viewpoint, you have a really good senior leadership team, and that may be full of chiefs of, heads of, whatever you want to, the right word for people is. But for me, I think it's a sort of a tap in, tap out, if you could.
Right.
And you sort of, so if you could say to the right person, right, we need, today there's a real issue on security. That exec meeting's going to only be about security, who's the right person? But to do that, you've got to have such a good, it's about job sharing in a way, that accountability. However, it's not always that easy, because if you're from financial services, you're going to have people with SMF and all of that stuff. So I don't quite know in practicalness if it's possible, but I do think it is about bringing people in, the right person at the right time to talk about that subject, the way we do with any other topic.
Yeah.
But for some reason, for technology, we always look for the unicorn.
Yeah. Arthur, this plays back to your point earlier on about if everybody has a bit of a baseline understanding, you know, of product and tech, and as well as finance and HR and all those kind of things, that's going to help this, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so just reflecting on what Karen just said, I guess I see it slightly different, because you can absolutely bring in the experts to present, to own, you know, the topic, etc. But they're not necessarily going to have the context of who's around that table. So they come in and they dip in and dip out. It's very different. We you know, at the C-suite level, we always talk about sort of first team, right? So the C-level team is your first team, is who you go to, is your, not the people that you lead and manage and your direct reports. It's actually the C-level. And that needs to be cohesive. And if you have people coming in and out and it's a fluid, that doesn't really sort of, that's not a strong organization the way I see it.
Okay. I mean, I think the challenge there is that fluidity, I mean, I suggested it a minute ago, but fluidity means that some of the other more strategic things might not get covered, or the finance things, or any of those things. So how do you balance that? If you're bringing experts on demand, as it were, to make sure you're covering the right subjects, does that mean actually the person sitting in the corner with the real C title is still needed to sort of tie all that together? Or, and I'm channeling a question from Jay here, what role does AI play into collapsing C-level roles? Somebody was going to ask that question, right? Sorry about that.
Well, can I take it?
Yeah, go for it.
I'll tell you something about what I've seen in the last 6 months. So in the last 6 months, because I've been working in direct-to-consumer businesses, there's been a massive shift away in direct-to-consumer businesses from SEO to AEO, which is answer engine optimization, which I think hopefully many of you will be aware of this. So it's about how do you get your brand, and maybe David, this is your comment at the start, how do you get your brand or your reputation into ChatGPT so that when you look at LTL, your name comes up? You know, so there's a lot of effort going on in a lot of direct-to-consumer brands in trying to get, you know, get presence inside of ChatGPT, inside of AI answer engines, and that is it's quite a complex thing to sort out, because it involves marketing, which is a very important function in a direct-to-consumer business. We haven't talked about marketing, but marketing is becoming massively tech-oriented. AI is becoming hugely important to a marketing team, and they are also another area where, as CPTO, CTO, you often in a direct-to-consumer business will be working with marketing very heavily. That has changed completely in the last 6 months, to the extent that in board meetings now with those kind of businesses, something that was, you talk about 6 months ago, is now a completely different topic. And it isn't even about getting the right C team person, it's about what on earth is going on. How do you even, because it's quite opaque how those systems work. And the pace of release of software from OpenAI, I mean, it was just an announcement last night. I haven't even read it. What does that mean in terms of building agentic systems, where you're in a business where they may have started an initiative with N8N, and then this morning on the way in, it was like, you don't stop N8N, just use ChatGPT instead. It's really difficult to coordinate all of that stuff and understand what's going on.
You just really broadened it out, but you're scaring people now, right? Now they've got to be marketing experts. They were just getting a handle on the technology, and now they've got to be geniuses in marketing.
It goes back to Lubomira's point that you have to have a very strong C team, because these things are coming in from all angles. And it's less about like you're the CXO or whatever it is, but that team, the C team topology will be different in every company. So do you have the right people? Are they a strong team? It's that 5 dysfunctions of a team. You know, do you have the trust at that level to be able to, work on a common strategy and not worry about, well, there's a CMO, they have to deal with that sort of thing, not the CTO.
And I think, Arthur, this is what you were touching on in terms of the one team. Your team is not your team below you, it's your team that you're with in the C-suite together. Yeah. And that's something that, if they've all got an awareness of everybody's role, then they're going to start pulling in the same direction, right?
Yeah. Can I say something about because you brought up the AI bit, so I think we should touch upon that. So I think there are, companies, and we talk about sort of, what company is going to be the first sort of one-person company that reaches, $1 billion in valuation, whatever it is, right? The metric.
That's Lubomira's company next year.
Working on
so I suppose, if you're building from scratch, possibly, if you have something that is already, you have a group of humans, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to then actually just whittle out, like you can maybe collapse, 1 or 2 C-suite roles. I also think that at the end of the day, we're human beings, and actually there will naturally be a tendency to want to connect and work with other human beings, right? So it's a little bit lonely to have like a one person, no matter how much money you can make from just using AI to build the company. So I think that's probably sort of where I see things, and I also think to a certain extent at the C level it's very difficult to completely rip up everything, and that's just going to tear the company apart.
Yeah. Can I add something very quickly? So one anecdote. So last week I was having a conversation with an investor, and one of the questions they asked me is, so is your product going to eliminate the need of a certain XC role, right? So that was like immediately where they kind of thought, what they thought about, right? Where they went with it. And my answer was no, right? It's not about that, right? So I think like that's kind of in a lot of people's minds, and certainly kind of investors, which then, board, et cetera, trickling down. So that's, something to think about. But I actually want to bring another aspect, just because we're, the question of AI. It's also, there is an aspect of everybody can go right now on ChatGPT or any other app and just ask a question about marketing or finance, or explain this to me, compliance, I don't know. And then all of a sudden think they're expert and they know the field, right? And I will come to you now at the next meeting and I will challenge you, right? On your marketing plans or on your tech plans or your product plans, because I did a bit of search, I did a bit of reading and strategizing with it, and all of a sudden I'm an expert on it. So I wonder also, how do we handle these conversations, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that challenge about where's the real expertise and how do you contextually apply that, right? Yeah. And I think if we've all learned one thing from things like ChatGPT and Claude, is that context is often missing, right? And I think the humans can bring that, and if they're familiar with their business, familiar with how their colleagues operate, et cetera, I think that's a really important aspect. Listen, we're in our last 5 minutes, so we're going to wrap up. I'm going to take a question, the most popular question from Sophie, which people can vote for the questions, you see. Can anyone share a specific example of where collapsing roles produced a positive outcome or was a change to regret, and what did you learn from that? So I'm not going to ask anyone, I'm going to ask all of you to give an example of where it either worked or it didn't work. It doesn't have to be for you, it can be another company. Mal, let's start with you.
I can think of an example where the AI responsibility was collapsed into the marketing department, and that really didn't work. It's not a good combination.
Don't laugh, those people in marketing try hard.
So, because the problem is that there are certain things that if you use coding AIs and stuff like that, so Bolt and Lovable and those kind of tools, and you're not technical, it can give you a certain impression of how easy it is to write software, and that becomes a very unfortunate conversation. So that is the example that I would give of it not working.
Okay.
I think I can give one example of it working quite effectively. So I mentioned earlier about cyber, about information security, about IT, and I found that eliding that with the technology function actually works really effectively.
Okay.
Because a lot of businesses, like my last business, it was all cloud infrastructure. There was nothing in-house, so it was more or less the same thing as platform engineering, or it was adjacent to it. So that worked quite effectively.
Brilliant, thank you. Karen, you got a good or a bad example?
Both, but I think both come down to one thing, it was the person in that role. So I think you can rearrange the deck chairs however you want, but if you've got the wrong person or the right person in those chairs, then that will make all the difference. So for me, it's about finding the right person for your business at that point in time, but also the person who worked, it worked great for 2 years, but then they weren't the right person anymore.
Right, because things changed, evolved, the company changed.
And they knew they weren't good enough to know, and they went, it's time to move on.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful exit. It was the right time.
One
So
of
I
our
think it's
panels
about
later
people.
today is going to talk about the rise of the fractional C-suite, right?
Yeah.
And I think that plays a role. People are getting used to, and that could lead us to a fluid boardroom.
Yeah.
Arthur, have you got a good example?
Yeah, so I joined the current company as the first CPO, and 3 years later switched roles. We moved product into the business units, and all the conversations around the tension and the debates and all of that. So now I have to put sort of both hats on. The world's gotten a little bit bigger. Product doesn't sit under me in terms of org structure. However, it always remains, right? So whether you're a tech leader or a product leader, those two is really sort of two sides of the same coin. And so I'm just sort of living that on a day-to-day basis. So it's been good so far.
Good so far. Okay, keep an eye on it though, Arthur, right? Lubomira, take us home.
I really, Karen's point really resonates. So I was in this situation where we had a leader, and I think his kind of skills and abilities were, both product and technology, and he kind of like really wanted to cover the area, but there was like a counterpart. And basically it's a situation where we had a person who could possibly take the both roles, but the structure we had was too rigid. You had, the CTO, the CPO, etc., etc. So it just kind of resulted in not working well, right? Because one really wanted to kind of take over, kind of could. The other one, was there, so still wanted to hold their role, have their say, and it just wasn't working well. That's the thing. And I think at that point, just the idea of actually collapsing them or working without a CTO or a CPO as a title just wasn't accepted, wasn't something that I guess we as an organization had the freedom or felt the freedom to do, which I think is what is the positive thing from all this kind of change and dynamic that we're seeing. Whatever the reasons and the drivers of the change are, I think the freedom to be like, actually this works for my company and I want to do this, or it doesn't work and I have the the freedom to do it, I think that is the positive.
Okay, I'll give my own example actually. So no names, no pack drill, but I've been in organisations where when I've joined as the CTO and often CTO, CIO, there's been a product person. Sometimes it's a CPO, sometimes it's a product director. And, not always, but sometimes you go there and you think, I know more about product than this person does, right? And then suddenly you're like, So how do I deal with this? And basically you have a territory grab. You have somebody who is trying to justify their existence.
Right.
And what you really want to say to your CEO is like, just get them out of the way.
Yep.
We'll do it better, right? Not because I'm a genius, but you find that, you know, the right person at the right stage of the company, yeah? And so actually collapsing those roles isn't me grabbing product so much, but is saying, you know, we don't need somebody at this point in the journey and we can bring those things together.
Yeah.
The CEO loves it because it's like, you know, finance saving and stuff like that sort of thing. But then you get responsible for everything, right? So you've got to be careful about that now, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, thank you for the questions you submitted. Sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we got a good load of questions, so that was really good. I hope that we're going into a networking break now. Hopefully you've realised that we've got some really capable, experienced people here who all come from different backgrounds and have different opinions. So grab them in the break. I'm sure they'll be more than willing to share any further questions or dive deep into anything. But for now, can we please thank Lubomira, Arthur, Karen and Mal. Thanks very much.